For right now, let's show you some live picture out of Miami in the United States. And you know that the big story coming out of the US today is the indictment of, or the facing of the indictment by former President of the United States, Donald Trump, in regards to unlawfully keeping these national security documents. And then he was accused of lying about them. That picture is on the way to his resort, his club, this golf club that he owns just outside of Miami.
And we saw earlier on these visuals, or we saw some of his supporters who were there pledging their loyalty. You'd remember what they've had to say throughout this entire process is that they believe this is a witch hunt, which is something that he said himself. And they say that this is an attempt to make sure that he does not run for presidency again. So there's been quite a lot of talk around this. And remember, these are charges, 37 of them, that are linked to the classified documents.
And he is going to be appearing in Miami federal court on Tuesday following the fact that his documents have been unsealed. Let's go back now to our U.S. correspondent, Kate Fisher, who's watching the story for us. And Kate was telling us just a little bit earlier on that while the former president has vowed to continue his campaign to regain the presidency in the 2024 election, it sounds like what's happening with this indictment has only empowered rather than imperiled his presidential prospects. And Kate, let's pick up the story from that point. You mentioned earlier on, and we were showing our viewers some of that live picture of his supporters who have shown up to profess the undying support for not only Trump in his personal capacity, but also his presidential election bid. But there's also this sort of threat of violence. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, that's right. Authorities in Miami are concerned about whether anybody could come with any thoughts of being more than just a peaceful protester. Obviously, everyone in the US has the memory of January the 6th in their heads when there were rioters descended on the US Capitol here in Washington, D.C. So there is concern about safety and about potential violence. But the last time that Donald Trump appeared in court, indicted on charges in the state of New York, there was no violence. Yes, protesters arrived on both sides, but it didn't end up being anything more than peaceful, and they will be hoping the same happens in Miami tomorrow. But of course, they just don't know. This is federal charges. It is more serious. As you say, it's more than 36 counts, a 49-page indictment saying that Donald Trump not only hoarded this classified top secret material, but that he then obstructed when authorities tried to remove it back and take it back to Washington. He said that he didn't have it and he tried to stop them from taking it back. And that's what makes it so damaging. As for whether it will impact his presidential campaign, as you rightly say, it has inspired many of his supporters to be more vigorously behind him and donate more money to that campaign. But it is no doubt going to be very difficult for him to defend himself in two separate criminal indictments at the same time as running a successful presidential campaign. It's unprecedented and it's going to be tough.
Well, opinion polls that we've been seeing show him far ahead of his rivals for the Republican Party's presidential nominations. So far, they've largely sided with him. So that's on his support-based side. Talk to us about, you know, the rest of America and how they're viewing all of this.
That's a really important differentiation to make. Yes, amongst his die-hard supporters in the Republican Party, it really probably wouldn't matter what he was charged with or what he did. They would be behind him, whatever. And that means that he is way ahead in the polls in the Republican primary because he has such a strong support amongst Republican voters. But in the country as a whole, which of course is what he has to win if he wants to become president, it's one thing to be chosen as the nominee but for the Republican Party, but then he is standing against likely Joe Biden, and the rest of the country get to have their say on it. And the rest of the country, according to the latest polls, do not agree with those Republican die-hard Trump supporters. They are concerned about these charges and what it means about his handling of classified documents and what it means about when he was asked to hand them back, his behaviour then as well. So I think that is going to be a really big problem for the Republican Party. They may see him as their vote winner in the primaries, but when it comes to the general election across the whole country, will he have enough support amongst the American people to beat Joe Biden? And looking at the polls at the moment, it doesn't look like that's the case.
Kate Fisher, SABC News correspondent, thank you very much. Just giving us some more detail on the story that former President Donald Trump scheduled to appear in a Miami federal court tomorrow for an initial appearance on those charges. We'll keep you abreast of the very latest as and when it happens.